They were the most famous family in music history. 9 kids from Gary, Indiana, raised in a tiny house under a father with an iron fist and a dream, who somehow became the soundtrack of a generation. Michael, Janet, Jermaine, Tito, Jackie, Marlon, Randy. Their names alone meant something: moonwalks and sequined gloves. Billboard chart records that may never be broken. The kind of fame that doesn't just touch pop culture, it becomes pop culture. But behind all of that was something else. Something the fan magazines didn't show. Something the award show smiles covered up. Arrests, courtrooms, domestic violence, fraud, rape allegations, a $6.5 million judgment, and one trial so big the whole world stopped to watch. Today, we're going inside the legal history of the Jackson family, not to tear down a legacy, not to make heroes into villains, but because the truth, all of it, is what makes a story real. And this family? Their story is more real and more complicated than most people know. Stay with me, because what happened behind closed doors in one of the most famous families on earth is something you need to hear. To understand the legal troubles, you have to understand where this family came from. Joseph Walter Jackson, Joe Jackson, raised his children in a 2-bedroom house at 2300 Jackson Street in Gary, Indiana. Yes, the street they lived on was literally called Jackson Street. He worked at a steel mill during the day. At night, he rehearsed his kids like a drill sergeant. The stories that have come out over the years, they're difficult to hear. Belt, strap, high standards, no excuses. Michael Jackson later spoke publicly about the fear he felt around his father, about performing flawlessly or facing punishment. The trauma was real, and it was documented. But Joe got results. By 1969, the Jackson 5 had signed to Motown Records. By 1971, they had their first #1 single. By the time Michael was 13, he was already one of the most famous entertainers in America. And the pressure, financial, emotional, public, never let up. Some families, when pushed to extremes, fracture in private ways. The Jacksons fractured in public ones. Let's start with the brother who actually has the most concrete criminal record within the immediate Jackson family, Randy Jackson, the youngest of the brothers, the one who replaced Jermaine when Jermaine left for a solo deal with Motown. Randy was talented, percussionist, vocalist, part of the Jacksons for years, and by the late 1980s, he had gotten married to a woman named Eliza Shaffey. Then 1991 happened. January 1991. Randy Jackson was formally charged with battery. He had beaten his wife, Eliza Shaffey, and their daughter Stevana, who was just months old at the time. Let that sit for a second. Not a dispute, not an argument that got out of hand. He was charged with battery against his wife and a baby girl. He pled no contest to the charge. No contest, which means he didn't admit guilt, but he didn't fight it either. He was placed on 2 years probation and ordered to enroll in a domestic violence program. He didn't enroll. He just didn't go. November 1991. Eliza Shaffey called the police. She told them the beatings hadn't stopped, that despite the probation, despite the court order, despite the program he was supposed to be in, nothing had changed. A bench warrant was issued. Randy Jackson was arrested again. This time, the judge had less patience. Randy was sentenced to 30 days in Pine Grove Hospital, a mental health facility in Canoga Park, plus the remainder of his probation, plus enrollment in a full year-long domestic violence rehabilitation program. His wife, Eliza, was furious. Not because he was sentenced, because she felt he should have gone to prison. She filed for divorce. And honestly, you can't blame her. The bankruptcy years didn't end there for Randy. In 1996, he filed for bankruptcy. He was ordered to surrender his shares in a company called Modern Records, Inc. In May of 1998, an arrest warrant was issued when he failed to turn over those shares. He couldn't even comply with bankruptcy court orders. And then in 2001, a decade after the domestic violence charges, Randy Jackson pled guilty to bankruptcy fraud. He had failed to list all of his vehicle assets in his bankruptcy filing. That's a federal offense. Multiple arrests, a battery conviction, probation violations, bankruptcy fraud, an actual plea of guilty. On paper, Randy Jackson has the most extensive criminal record of any immediate Jackson family member. His name just doesn't come up as often as his brother's, but it should. Now we come to the name everyone knows, Michael Jackson, the king of pop, the most successful solo music artist of all time, a man who sold over 400 million records, who changed the way we danced, the way we dressed, the way we thought about what a pop star could be, and a man who faced two separate criminal investigations for child sexual abuse and was never convicted of either. That last part matters, and we'll get to it. But the allegations themselves and what happened in the courtroom in 2005, that's a story unlike anything else in music history. 1993, the first accusation. It started with a 13-year-old boy named Jordan Chandler. Jordan had met Michael through his family. The two had grown close, phone calls, sleepovers at Neverland, trips abroad. At the time, Jackson had a pattern of befriending young boys, which he described publicly as innocent and rooted in his own lost childhood. But Jordan's father, Evan Chandler, a dentist and aspiring screenwriter, began to suspect something was wrong. He confronted his ex-wife, he talked to lawyers, and then, in secretly recorded phone calls that were later played for Jackson's attorneys, Evan Chandler said, and I'm paraphrasing here because this was an actual tape, that he intended to destroy Michael Jackson. In August 1993, Jordan told a psychiatrist that Jackson had molested him. The LAPD opened a criminal investigation. The media went nuclear. This was 1993, before social media, before smartphones, and it was still the biggest story in the world. Police searched Neverland. They found nothing definitive. Jackson went on television in December 1993 in a live broadcast seen around the world and denied everything. In January 1994, Jackson settled the civil lawsuit with the Chandler family. Reports placed the settlement somewhere between 15 and 23 million, though the exact figure was sealed. Here's what's crucial to understand about that settlement. Criminal cases cannot be settled with money. The settlement ended only the civil suit. The criminal investigation continued, but without Jordan Chandler's cooperation, and he ultimately refused to testify, the grand juries in both Los Angeles and Santa Barbara declined to indict. By September 1994, prosecutors admitted they couldn't move forward. No criminal charges, no conviction, but the shadow. That followed Michael Jackson for the rest of his life. 2003, Neverland raided. Michael booked. A decade passed. Michael rebuilt. Dangerous. History. Invincible. He remained one of the most famous people on the planet. Then, in November 2003, journalist Martin Bashir's documentary Living with Michael Jackson aired. In it, Jackson was seen holding hands with a young boy named Gavin Arvizo and discussing how he regularly shared his bedroom with children. The public reaction was immediate. Santa Barbara Sheriff's deputies raided Neverland Ranch. On November 20th, 2003, Michael Jackson voluntarily surrendered to authorities. He was booked, fingerprinted, photographed, released on $3 million bail. The king of pop had a mugshot. 2005, the trial. In February 2005, the trial began. People vs. Jackson. 10 criminal counts, child molestation, administering an intoxicating agent to a minor, conspiracy, and extortion. The accuser was Gavin Arvizo, a teenager from East Los Angeles who had met Jackson while battling cancer. The prosecution argued that Jackson had molested him at Neverland. The defense argued that the entire accusation was fabricated, that the Arvizo family had a history of making false claims against celebrities. The trial lasted 5 months. Celebrity witnesses. tabloid reporters, former employees, Jackson's own past, including the 1993 settlement, which jurors were told about, all of it was laid before the court. On June 13, 2005, after 7 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Not guilty. On all 14 counts. Not guilty on every single charge, Jackson cried in court. His family stood around him. Outside the courthouse, fans screamed, released doves, danced in the street. Michael Jackson had never been convicted of anything. He died 4 years later, on June 25, 2009, from acute propofol intoxication, administered by his personal physician, who was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. The allegations didn't die with him. Documentaries followed. More accusers came forward. His estate has fought legal battles ever since. But the legal record? No conviction, ever. Let's talk about Jermaine, the second oldest brother, one of the original Jackson 5, the one whose Motown solo deal fractured the group in 1976, the one who came back. Jermaine has always been the family spokesman, the one who gives interviews defending Michael, the one who writes the books, the one who talks. But in December 2023, a woman named Rita Butler Barrett filed a civil lawsuit that changed the narrative around Jermaine Jackson completely. The 1988 accusation. Barrett alleged that in the spring of 1988, and when Jermaine was in his 30s, and she was a woman with connections to the music industry through her husband's work with Motown founder Berry Gordy, Jermaine Jackson arrived at her home unannounced. She says he forced his way inside. She says he violently raped her. And she says she reported it to Berry Gordy himself, who, according to the lawsuit, concealed it, withheld it, to protect profits and reputations. The lawsuit was filed under California's Sexual Abuse and Cover-Up Accountability Act, a law that temporarily allowed older sexual assault cases to be filed in civil court even when the criminal statute of limitations had passed. No response. Here's where it gets remarkable. Jermaine Jackson never responded to the lawsuit. Not once. His lawyers couldn't even be found. The plaintiff's attorneys tried repeatedly to serve him legal notices. They tried multiple times throughout 2025. They were eventually granted court approval to publish legal notice in the Los Angeles Times, which legally counts as service. Still, nothing. No statement, no denial, no attorney filing anything on his behalf. In April 2026, Barrett's legal team requested a default judgment, meaning that because Jermaine had failed to respond, the court should rule in her favor without a trial. On May 14, 2026, a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge entered the default judgment. Jermaine Jackson was ordered to pay Rita Butler Barrett more than $6.5 million in damages and court costs. And where was Jermaine when this happened? He was at the Hollywood premiere of the Michael Jackson biopic, walking the red carpet, smiling for cameras, while a judge was ordering him to pay $6.5 million to a woman who says he raped her 35 years ago. Let that image sit with you for a moment. Tito Jackson himself doesn't have a criminal record, but the most devastating legal story connected to Tito isn't about him being the accused, it's about him being on the side of justice. His ex-wife Dolores, everyone called her DD, was found floating in a pool at the home of her boyfriend Donald Bohanna in Ladera Heights, California, on August 27, 1994. She was 39 years old. Bohanna called 911 at 3 in the morning and told them there'd been a drowning. Tito and his sons, Taj, Terrell, and TJ, didn't believe it for a second. Their mother was terrified of water. She couldn't swim. Why would she have been in the deep end of a pool at 3 a.m.? The autopsy backed them up. There was evidence of blunt force trauma. The death was ruled non-accidental. D.D. Jackson had 58 separate injuries, including scratch marks and bruises on her body. Donald Bohanna was charged with murder. In 1998, he was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life. Tito fought for that. He filed a wrongful death civil suit. He went on television. He made sure the world knew his ex-wife's death was not an accident. His boys grew up without their mother because of what happened that night. Tito passed away himself in September 2024 at age 70 from a heart attack. He never stopped talking about DD. So here's the full picture. Randy Jackson, actual arrests, an actual battery conviction, a probation violation, and a guilty plea for bankruptcy fraud, the most documented criminal record in the family. Michael Jackson, the highest stakes criminal indictments in music history. 10 felony counts, a $3 million bail, a 5-month trial watched by the entire world, and an acquittal on every single charge. Jermaine Jackson, a civil lawsuit he never responded to. A $6.5 million default judgment for rape allegations dating back to 1988. A red carpet appearance the same day the judge signed off on the ruling. And Tito, not the accused, but the grieving ex-husband who spent years fighting for justice after his son's mother was murdered. None of this fits neatly into a headline. Because the Jacksons aren't a neat headline kind of family. They're complicated, talented beyond measure, damaged in ways that trace back to a small house in Gary, Indiana, and entangled with the legal system in ways that the glossy greatest hits albums never told you about. Here's what I want to leave you with. The Jackson family gave the world something real. The music, the actual music, changed people's lives, changed the shape of popular culture in ways that can't be undone and shouldn't be. But fame doesn't sanitize a family. Money doesn't either. And understanding the full story, the dark chapters alongside the Grammy wins, that's not disrespect. That's honesty. The victims in these stories deserve to be remembered too. Eliza Shaffy. The children who came forward, D.D. Jackson, Rita Butler Barrett. Their stories are part of the Jackson legacy, whether we acknowledge them or not. I'm not here to tell you what to think about Michael Jackson or Randy or Jermaine. I'm here to make sure you have the full picture. If this video gave you something to think about, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, we cover the stories behind the stories, and drop a comment. Which part of this surprised you the most? I'll see you in the next one.